Welcome to How Brands Are Built, where branding professionals get into the details of what they do and how they do it. I'm your host, Rob Meyerson. Thanks for listening. This season has been all about naming, and today I'm talking to Eli Altman, who runs 100 Monkeys, a naming and branding agency in Berkeley, California. Eli did his first freelance naming project at the age of 16. We'll talk about how that happened. He also wrote an Amazon bestseller, Don't Call It That, and you'll hear a bit about that too during the conversation. He's got a new book coming out soon, Run Studio Run, all about the business of running a small creative studio. Be sure to check that out. Talking to Eli, it's easy to see why clients like working with him. He's laid back, easy to talk to. He's got a great sense of humor. Naming can be a really big challenge, but Eli has this sort of calm confidence that makes it feel maybe a little less daunting. I hope you'll enjoy this conversation as much as I did. Here it is. Eli, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
So let's talk about Don't Call It That. I'm looking at my first edition copy of it right now. Very proud.
Limited edition.
Limited, exactly. I need to get a signature in here. Yeah. One of the first exercises in here is come up with some bad names for your project. Why is that a good place to start when you're trying to name something?
I guess there's a couple reasons, maybe chiefly among them that I think people are actually a lot better at coming up with bad names than they are at coming up with good names. It's an easier place to start. I think, most people's approach to naming something, if they've never done it before, is just to kind of sit at a table with a blank sheet of paper and a pen and wait until, genius strikes them, which is a really kind of frustrating and anxiety provoking feeling. But coming up with bad names is just, it's fun and quick and easy. And I think once you do it, you have some fodder in front of you to sort of look at and figure out, well, what makes these bad? And then if I know that, then if I flip that equation, then what would make a name good? So to me, it just sort of seemed like a nice, easy way in.
Yeah, that's a good point. It takes a lot of the pressure off, I suppose.
Yeah.
When you do have a naming project with a full creative brief and everything that you need to get started, what kind of process do you have? Is it sort of systematic or is it a little more loose and freewheeling?
We're very systematic. Okay. I think that, naming is a very subjective activity. And that, because it is, and because somebody's sort of hiring you and bringing you in to sort of help solve this problem, if the, process that they are faced with at that point is just kind of you sort of freewheeling, coming up with a bunch of stuff, seeing what works, what doesn't, it doesn't feel like you're really taking ownership over that situation. And, if you really get buy into the process, it's much easier to get buy into the result. Whereas if you just show someone, say, a list of 100 names, how are they going to tell which of those are good, or which stands out to them? It's just kind of a paradox of choice issue where, that decision, there might be a great name in there, but, good luck finding it.
Right. What's your take on naming in a group setting versus individually? Do you like the group brainstorms, or do you feel like naming is something that needs to be done individually? I
think, we definitely do both.
Okay.
And, depending on the type of project, it might sort of be more of one or the other. I think some projects are sort of by nature very research oriented. That if you're working on something really, technical or specific or with a lot of considerations in play, in those situations, we tend to sort of go a bit more individually, find our angles, do our research, and then we'll talk about it throughout the process. I think getting together periodically is really important just to check and see where people are, what's working and what isn't. But then say you're naming like a pizza place or something like that. I think, in that case, it's a lot more effective to just kind of throw a bunch of ideas around and see what happens, because there isn't this sort of delicate balance of considerations at that point. It's more just like, what's some
fun
weird,
ideas,
funny, interesting shit to come up with.
You're probably not diving into the history of pizza making, although you might, but probably less so.
Yeah. It takes a different type of pizza entrepreneur.
Personally, when you're in the name generation phase, is there any method to the madness? Do you feel like you can describe the process that you personally use?
One, I'm certain that I'm not using the same process every time. That it's really just kind of flipping through a bunch of different ways of thinking about something. Mm-hmm. And just seeing what different angles are, different sort of metaphors, allegories, related ideas, different ways at looking at a problem, taking different input, like different things we've heard like from the client or that we sort of know are important to communicate, and just rolling them around. And so it really depends on the project. It depends on what's working too.
Right.
That, you have some sense initially, right, based on, interviews and briefs and stuff, like, what a client's looking for. But then once you share names, you learn a lot about how people actually react to them. Mm-hmm. And, I think to me, I'm building this model in my head of like how somebody is interacting with names that we share, right? Like, what are they responding to? Are they driven by the sort of poetry of words, their etymology, a usage example? I mean, there's so many ways that people could talk about something as subjective as a name. Really digging into the ways that clients think about names tells us a lot about what's going to work and what isn't.
Sure.
And so I'm basically just refining this model in my head. And then obviously there's some sort of course correction involved there, because just because they might want something a certain way doesn't mean that we think that would be a good name for something. So that,
right. They're serving the client, and then they're serving the greater good of putting good names out into the world.
Right. And, I think anybody who's done this for any amount of time professionally has figured out the lesson of like, if you don't like a name enough to sort of like be proud of it and share it when the project's done, then don't put it in front of the client.
Right.
Because that's going to be the one that they're going to pick.
You talked about your own generation process really varying based on the project, but are there any special tricks or sort of go-to approaches? I don't know, like maybe if you hit writer's block or something like that, do you have a couple of things that you turn to try to get back into the project?
I guess, we do a fair bit of writing too. So like at 100 Monkeys, we do naming, and we also do just a fair bit of like, positioning, messaging, stuff like that. And so, whereas I think writer's block really sort of exists for that type of writing, actually don't really think it exists for naming. I think that you can go down a path and you can find everything that you think sort of fits on that path. But if you're not finding anything, then that's more indicative of how effective the path you're taking is. And that, naming it's not like you're going down one road and you need to sort of find, the best place to stop on that road. There's a million roads you can go down. And so if you're barreling down one and it's not yielding anything interesting, then get off, find a new place to look.
Right. What about even just writing out your list of names, or when you're generating names, are you working with a pad and pencil or Microsoft Word or something like that?
I use a notebook.
Got it.
A notebook and a pen. Yeah. I think all the stuff ends up in a computer, obviously, but I think that, I also think one really important distinction when coming up with names is like whether you're doing that with resources on your computer. That's, that's one way, right? To just kind of pour through a bunch of resources, be it, like Wikipedia or, whatever. But then there's also just kind of sitting and thinking.
Right.
And I think it's important to do both of those things on any project because they yield vastly different results.
Right.
And so the notebook allows me the flexibility to do it both ways. That if I kind of want to shut out, because like the problem is, right, you're working on your computer and then it's like, and then you get an email and then you get a notification and then you get a text, right? And so like all this shit's coming in and like you really just want to focus. And so many people shoot themselves in the foot with regard to their own focus all the time.
Well, even just in the realm of name generation, it's tempting then to go to thesaurus.com or look up a word on Wikipedia and things like that. And if you're really trying to avoid that, then I guess a pad and paper helps, or a pad and pencil helps you do that.
Exactly.
Today's episode is brought to you by Audible. For listeners of How Brands Are Built, Audible is offering a free audiobook download with a free 30-day trial to give you the opportunity to check out their service. To download your free audiobook today, go to audibletrial.com/HBAB for How Brands Are Built. Again, that's audibletrial.com/HBAB for your free audiobook. When you were talking about it being important to both work offline in an analog kind of way, and then also getting online and doing research, doing both for every project. Do you have a default order? Am I right that maybe you prefer to do the sort of offline stuff and just get the ideas out first before you look to the internet?
That's interesting. I mean, I honestly, I think I just go with whatever I think will be an easier place to start. Because just of diversity of projects, right? Like if we're doing a biotech project or something like that, I can almost guarantee I'll start online just because I need to feel more comfortable with that subject matter before I really dive in. Whereas if it's like a donut shop or something, I'd probably just start
something too well.
Very, very intimately. Then I'd probably just go for it, right? Like how do I need to educate myself to name a donut shop?
Got it.
It's not to say you can research anything, which is great and fun. But, I think in those instances where you sort of feel like, okay, I squarely get what this is, it might be easier to just start on your own.
In Don't Call It That, you have a great list of, or at least you mention a few mistakes or pitfalls that new namers sometimes make. What are things that you feel like you see a lot just off the top of your head, or that you've seen recently?
Yeah, I'll give you two. One is expecting the eureka moment. That's probably the biggest mistake. One of them I see is that you sort of, this like, well, we've looked at a lot of names, but I haven't found the one that like just jumps off the page at me. That is just a failure of imagination. Basically, like,
is that what you tell your clients?
Yeah, no, it's direct. And I think clients appreciate it when you're direct. That it's just like love at first sight, right? It makes for a easier Disney movie, but it doesn't connect with reality. That look at a real relationship, right? That when you first meet someone, you might realize that there's the potential for it to turn into something great, but you don't actually know it.
Right.
You feel the potential, right? And so, you're looking for that, and that's not this like, oh my God, there it is. It's just, that's just, people like that fantasy because it makes the decision easier for them, right? You don't actually have to make a decision between options. It's just like, oh, of course,
right.
This one just jumped, there it is. Whereas you're not factoring in realities like, well, can you actually have this name? Is it trademarkable? Could you get a URL? Does it mean something offensive in another language? There's like so many things you actually, so many tactical like points that a name needs to hit. That this like, oh my God moment, even if you were to, miraculously have it, you're not through the woods yet.
Right.
So that's one. Another one I think is just being descriptive. People are afraid that if your name doesn't say what you do, that people won't get it. Which I think all you have to do is just look at the brands that you interact with every day.
Right.
And you'll see that like, oh yeah, I actually interact with a lot of brands where I'm not sure what that means. It's like, what percentage of people who walk into a Starbucks get the reference?
Right. I want to ask you about that because I've seen a lot of namers talk about avoiding descriptive, and I completely get your argument and agree with it. But I think, I'm sure you would also concede that there is a time and a place for a more descriptive name, maybe not for a company, but for a feature on a product or something like that. How do you think about that at 100 Monkeys, or how do you draw that distinction of when names should be more or less descriptive?
Yeah, so totally. I think it really gets down to sort of navigation functionality questions. Like when we do a lot of product architecture, right, where we're talking about, 50 products, a couple hundred products, or, a product that has like, 25 features or things like that. You don't want to put, really interesting, evocative names on everything. It just creates this mess, like, in design that's like you want to track when you're looking at a layout, you're tracking like where your eye goes first, right? And then the order in which you move through a layout. It's kind of a similar thing with naming. If every name you're presenting is like similarly evocative or attention grabbing, where do you go first, right? You get confused, with everything trying to sort of vie for your attention simultaneously. So I think it's just a bigger decision about what your hook is. Where do you really want to grab someone and bring them in? And then once they're there, how do you help them find their way around? Which probably leans a bit more on being descriptive than it does on just being like, look at this cool name for a thing.
You told me the other day that there's a third edition of Don't Call It That coming out, I think you said in the near future. So can you talk a little bit about the book and the differences between the different editions, just so that people can understand that? Sure.
Well, yeah. So the third edition is actually kind of far out.
Oh, okay.
I'm finishing up Studio Run now, which should ship in like July. And then once I get that out into the world, then I'm sort of turning my energy back to Don't Call It That a bit. But so between the first two editions, the first edition was just that, right? It was my first take on just sort of like helping people work their way through a naming process. And the second edition is like 40% bigger than the first edition. It includes a lot of vignettes from people who use the first edition to name things.
Okay. So you got a lot of feedback and people kind of telling you how they were using the book.
Yeah, exactly. And that's it. I put it out there, and it's hard like with the first edition, right? Cause you're just like, you're not really getting any feedback. Or if I wanted to just kind of like release a draft to people, it'd take a long time for them to, I'd have to find the scenario where they're actively going to name something, so it's waiting for all the stars to align on that. I guess I was just too impatient, but the second edition, factors in a lot of what I heard, in terms of feedback from the first, and also just includes a bunch of other stuff like, sort of found some more name types and, some better examples, some new chapters. I think there's about like 10 new chapters in the second edition.
And one thing that people aren't going to be able to tell on a podcast is the book is beautiful. I mean, you've clearly put a lot of work into making it not only really useful and read really nicely, but it looks great as well. Can you talk about who you've worked with to make it look so nice, and kind of the thinking that went into making it such a well-designed book?
Thanks. I owe all the credit to my publisher and design partner, Brian Scott, who runs Extracurricular Press in San Francisco, and also Boone Design. So he's a designer and a publisher. And when I was coming out with the first edition, I was really lucky that there was like actually some interest in publishing the book. I thought that was going to be an uphill battle on its own. But I think a lot of publishers are really looking for this kind of like niche type of thing. So that worked out all right. But, Brian was the only one who was really sort of open to how the book was visually going to come together. Most publishers, that's just kind of on their side of the fence. They'll design it how they want to design it. They might give you sort of, a few options on a cover or something like that. But considering this is sort of like representing my professional life, I really cared a lot about, how it looked.
Yeah.
And so, that was totally a collaborative effort. And then the cover on the first edition was hand lettered by Caitlin Galloway in San Francisco. And the second edition, all of the sort of chapter heads and titles and everything were done by Miguel Reyes of Commercial Type in New York. And we're using Commercial Type fonts in the book as well.
It's so cool. Well, it looks great.
Thanks.
I don't usually ask namers a lot about their personal lives in these conversations, but you have kind of a unique story as a namer. So your dad started 100 Monkeys in 1990, and I believe you're the only second generation namer out there, or the only one that I've talked to. What was that like growing up in a namer's household? And, are there any stories or experiences along the way that, shaped you as a namer?
Yeah. I mean, it was really fun. I didn't know that it was a weird or unique experience until I was a lot older. Mm-hmm. But I think, we worked a lot at, naming like around the dinner table or on long car rides or things like that. Just trying to get my dad to write something down, because we'd say all sorts of garbage. And then every once in a while he'd write something down and you'd be like, okay, that meant that was actually a decent one.
So that was a little win whenever he broke out the pad and jotted something down.
Yeah. It was like those yellow legal pads, and he used Le Pen, which I guess is the Le car of pens. But, so that, that was kind of the goal. And I don't know. I mean, both my parents are writers. I think that's helpful too, that I just kind of grew up with a lot of writing and a lot of reading, and just a general appreciation for language. And so, at 16, I started, once my voice basically got like deep enough where someone thought there's a chance I could be an adult. I started, doing freelance projects. I honestly would have done it earlier if I could have got away with it.
Yeah. And was your dad able to put you in touch with a lot of people to do that for, or did you really kind of initiate that on your own?
Well, so it's basically that I would do the projects for people who, who were sort of, who like couldn't afford to work with the 100 Monkeys. So somebody just, because we'd get all sorts of people right in like, oh, my like little landscaping business or, something like that.
Right.
And they'd say, well, this probably wouldn't work for us, but, I got somebody for you.
So you used to do that as a kid, and now you've written Don't Call It That for similar purposes, I suppose, to help people kind of do this in an easier or less expensive way. So you've kind of replaced your 16-year-old self with the book.
Exactly. Yeah. Couldn't have said it better myself. I mean, yeah. And also I think it's just kind of important in terms of like getting reps in too, that like the number of projects I did that way, I don't think I could have gotten sort of more experience in a kind of lower pressure environment, Right. So it's really kind of like a nice way in with a bunch of people who, like most of them were tremendously grateful and like really happy with the work, but, it's also, people who were difficult or didn't like anything. And I was just really happy that I got to go through all of those experiences, like pretty young and refine my own process over time.
Well, I want to, end on just a fun question. You've been doing this for a long time. What is your favorite thing about being a namer and coming up with name ideas?
I think my favorite thing about it is just like getting to manipulate language, in new and creative ways that so many people just think of language as like the there are words and those words have definitions, but the kind of contextual meaning of language, the associations, the kind of feelings of whether a word feels sort of smart or interesting or foreign, or, it's just like all of those kind of nuances of words, or whether a word feels different when it's with other words or on its own. Just like really diving into that kind of character. That's what I love about naming. And I loved it when I first did it, and I sort of I still do, and just appreciate it with maybe more detail at this point.
Eli, thanks so much for making the time to join me.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Rob.
Thanks for listening to How Brands Are Built. If you like what you heard, please subscribe at iTunes or your podcasting service of choice and leave a rating and a review. I'd love to hear what you think. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, any of the social networks of your choice, or visit us online at howbrandsarebuilt.com, where you can check out show notes, articles, blog posts, sign up for the newsletter, get in touch with me if you have questions or suggestions for the show. On the website, we'll post links to Eli's new book, Run Studio Run, as well as Don't Call It That, which I highly recommend you check out. How Brands Are Built is a production of Heirloom Agency, LLC. Our theme music is by Isha Erskine Project. I'm Rob Meyerson, and I'll talk to you next time. Thanks again.